Hello fellow travellers, and welcome to episode number 26 of The Apple and the Hero. My name is Sara Orfali, and today I would like to be your guide on the pathways of history. We're already 9 episodes into our deep dive into Roman history, and as I hinted in the last episode, we're getting very close to the end. The starting goal was to meet the heroes and heroines at the beginning of Rome and up to the Roman Republic. As we're going to see in these last episodes, the days of the Roman Republican government are sadly numbered. I would like to take this opportunity to mention that also season 1 of this podcast is coming to a close. When I started this, I didn't think I would last this long or have this much fun. But here we are, almost a year later, and it's all thanks to you, my fellow travellers. Don't worry though, this will not be farewell, but a simple pause to let me reorganize my thoughts and, a little bit of spoilers, to give me time to work on another idea that has been banging around in my head for quite some time. I will post everything regarding this new journey I have in mind on Instagram at the Apple and the Hero channel, so please join me there. Still, now it's not the time for goodbyes, for we have still a couple of heroes to meet in the last churning days of the Roman Republic. We left a decimated but finally victorious Rome at the end of the last episode. Hannibal had done as he pleased for a quarter of a century, sowing fear and panic through Italy from the moment of his historic crossing through the Alps. More than 150,000 Romans, soldiers and commanders alike, had gone against him, only to be killed by his genius and his military superiority. After Cannae, the situation had seemed so desperate, and many a Roman had wondered if the great Mars, god of war, had decided to just forsake his children. But then, rising from the ashes like a phoenix, the Romans had proved that all was not lost, and that if the gods had looked away, that had only been a momentary distraction. The architect of this spectacular comeback was a youth, one who should have been too young to lead, if only the Carthaginians hadn't called all his elders before him. Publius Cornelius Scipius was his name, forever to be remembered as Africanus, for his complete triumph over Hannibal and his people directly in Africa. Many expected great things from him, but sadly his military genius didn't extend to the political arena. 2 of his grandchildren, though, would more than make up the difference, even though their political agenda didn't sit particularly well with their famous grandfather. The names were Tiberius Sempronius and Gaius Sempronius Gracchus, children of the second daughter of Scipio Africanus, Cornelia Africana, and Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus Senior. In school, in Italy, they are known as the Gracchi brothers, and they are quite famous for their reforms in favour of the plebs. Let's start at the beginning, though. Cornelia Africana and Tiberius Sempronius Senior had 12 children together, but only 3 managed to reach adulthood. The aforementioned brothers and a sister, Sempronia, who married the destroyer of Carthage in the Third Punic War, Scipio Aemilianus. As the oldest male and the heir of the family, Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus Jr. started his political career, his cursus honorum, well intent on reaching and surpassing his father, who had been consul twice and had even been granted 2 triumphs. His military debut was done under the command of his brother-in-law Scipio Aemilianus, and Tiberius immediately showed his courage and capabilities by being one of the first to scale the walls of Carthage during the Third Punic War. After that, it seemed a given that more commands would follow, and he was given the quaestorship in Spain, a territory that had always seemed to favour the Scipio family. Unfortunately for him, though, Spain would not offer him fame, but humiliation. A peace treaty rejected by the Senate put Tiberius's political career in jeopardy, and made him also cut ties with the Scipionic faction, given that it had been his very own grandfather, Scipio Africanus, who had pushed the Senate to disavow the treaty. For a patrician youth in Rome, the political career was everything, so Tiberius organized his comeback. If the Senate didn't want him, he would go to the plebs. In the year 133 BCE, he ran for the position of tribune of the plebs, as he felt this was the role which would best help him achieve the political revolution he had in mind. I'm sure that Tiberius wanted to leave his mark, and while he managed to do it, I strongly suspect it wasn't exactly in the way he might have envisioned it. Rome was tethering on the brink of disaster. The way of life that had been so dear to the Romans for almost 5 centuries was breaking down, without fanfare and without anybody taking note about it. The Roman Republic was on its last leg, and what Tiberius was about to do would push his beloved motherland over the edge. The Romans were elitists. Despite the enfranchisement of the plebs in the 3rd century BCE, voting rights were still related to wealth, which was tied to the amount of land in one's name. The loss of 1/5 of the male population over 17, caused by Hannibal, and the subsequent Roman expansion in Gaul, which at the time came down to the north of Italy, had meant that there had been an influx of new land, but not enough landowners. The land should have been administered by the state, but in reality it had all been snatched up by those who were already sizable landowners, and the others had no other choice than become landless citizens working on someone else's land. In fewer words, the rich had become richer and the poor poorer, with the added malice of being excluded from the political scene. Not only that, in Rome, the military sustained itself on the conscription of landowners. With most of the citizens becoming landless workers, the great military machine of Rome was starting to falter. Not all senators and patricians seemed to be aware of the problem, though, but Tiberius Gracchus and his factions were, and wanted to do something about it. Theirs wasn't a novel idea. They simply meant to revive a practice that had gone in disuse during the Punic Wars. They wanted to settle the landless men on the extensive public lands that Rome had conquered for itself during its latest campaigns. The same land that had already been snatched up irregularly by the Italian gentry. Moreover, the bill that Tiberius wanted to pass would make those landless men who received a plot of their own clients of those who were sponsoring the bill, creating quite the sizable power base for Tiberius and his political allies. There was, as I said, nothing particularly new about this policy except for the scale and the fact that it was going to ruffle more than a few feathers. Tiberius had foreseen some opposition and had worked into his bill the possibility for the current landowners to retain large portions of land in private ownership. So, yes, giving up something while still keeping most of the wealth. It seems like a viable compromise, doesn't it? Some senators at the time didn't think so, which was why Tiberius had chosen to run for the role of tribune of the plebs. It had occurred to him that this position would give him the best chance of seeing his bill passed and executed. After all, as I've said, it was the quintessential popular maneuver. Tiberius had everything ready. He had the sponsorship of the sole consul in Rome at the moment. Some senators were on his side. The people definitely backed him and his bill. All seemed in order for a bloodless victory. All except Tiberius' own co-tribune, Octavius. He vetoed the bill and stopped it from going to the people for the vote. To say that Tiberius didn't take such a stop with grace is to be kind to him. At first, he simply sought the approval of the Senate, though belated as it was. Then, deciding that even if the Senate approved, it would come too late, he decided to remove Octavius from office entirely. This had never happened before. Removing competition doesn't seem like a fair way of winning, does it? Such a way of conduct costed Tiberius' allies, and the political tension, especially with the Scipian faction, which seemed hell-bent in denying Tiberius everything, including family ties, brought him to commit one impropriety after another. The people were clearly on his side, and so once his year as a tribune was up, Tiberius sought re-election, which was just about the worst mistake he could make. To hold the same office twice in a row was simply not done in the Roman Republic, except in times of crisis. The Senate interpreted Tiberius's actions as a mockery of all they stood for and wanted him punished. When it became clear that the consul would not seek punishment for the unruly, soon-to-be re-elected tribune, the Scipionic faction took matters into their hands and precipitated the situation into a riot. It's not clear what they expected out of it. Maybe they had just wanted to break up the illegal re-election that was happening under their noses. I don't know. What happened, though, is that the riot, as riots are wont to do, grew out of control and ended with the clubbing to death of Tiberius himself and the killing of some scores of citizens. The conservative faction had won the day, yes, but the cost of their victory would prove far steeper than what they might have anticipated. In hindsight, historians consider the death of Tiberius the beginning of the end for the Republic. The situation might have still the potential of being salvaged, if not for what happened to the other of the Gracchi brothers, Gaius Sempronius Gracchus. In order to avenge his older brother, Gaius started his own political career, which immediately saw him sent to the provinces with a quaestorship so that he wouldn't be in Rome to cause troubles and be elected tribune of the plebs like he wanted. Still, 10 years after his brother, in 123 BCE, Gaius managed to land the role he wanted, and from then on, he proceeded to be a thorn in the side of the Senate and the Roman patricians, with a series of legislations aimed at severely reducing their power. His landslide victory as a tribune of the plebs on the following year vindicated his brother, who had been killed for having sought exactly the same thing. His political agenda, like his brother's, was very much in favor of the plebeians, and it almost seemed like divine justice when he finally managed to obtain the agrarian reform that had so eluded Tiberius. But then, Gaius went a step further, putting forward a proposal that not only earned him the customary scorn and curses from the Senate, but also alienated him from the plebs. He proposed to give full Roman citizenship to all the Latin populations, and partial Roman citizenship, so without the right to vote, to all the Italic populations. This was unprecedented and ruffled feathers at all levels. The citizenship had always been the clear separation between the Romans, beloved by the gods, and everybody else. Sure, the plebeians might have been poor, but they were, or at least they felt themselves to be, better than those who couldn't boast their Romanity. Everyone felt that Gaius Gracchus was trying to dilute their birthright. In his defense, he wasn't trying to dilute anything. He was just trying to get more people to help maintain the state functioning. Finally, the Senate and the people had something in common. Get rid of Gaius Gracchus and his pesky ideas. Gaius and his supporters hauled themselves up on the Aventine Hill, but when the consul in charge offered impunity to those who would give up themselves, the former tribune remained alone. Knowing he would never be spared, he asked his faithful servant to kill him, thus ending the story of the Gracchi brother and launching their legend. Their mother, Cornelia, who would in time be hailed as the perfect role model for a Roman woman, was banned for mourning her sons, and could do nothing as the memory of her children was cursed. Much like it had happened after Tiberius' death, the state felt it had won the day, when in reality, this was nothing but another crack at the very foundations of the system. It was now very clear that the Senate wasn't above using violence to prove its point, and worse, that now violence was the only path forward for the patricians. The system had broken. It would not be long before someone or something appeared to take advantage of that. The Senate and the plebs thought that the death of Gaius Gracchus had put a stop to all that nonsense about giving Roman citizenship to people who weren't Roman by birth. I imagine they heaved a big sigh of relief when things got back the way they were supposed to be, the way they had always been for centuries. The issue, though, had only moved to the background, and it was about to explode in Rome's face. Some 3 decades after the death of one of their champions, for Gaius hadn't been the first nor the last to raise such a topic, the Italian allies, the so-called Soci, started a war, the social war. They wanted citizenship, the right to vote and be considered a part of Rome and not just some expendable cannon fodder. The death of Marcus Livius Drusus in the year 95 BCE, the latest champion for equality, lit the fuse. Enough was enough. The Soci declared war. Historians are very clear that the prevalent emotion in Rome, the moment the first ally declared itself an enemy, was confusion. Had they not done good by their allies until that moment? Then the confusion morphed into shock when the Romans realized that they were about to go against an enemy they had trained and equipped. It has to be said that not all Soci turned against Rome. Those who had already stood by the Romans, so the Latins, the Etruscans, the Umbrians, and even the Greek colonies of the south, remained loyal. It was the Samnites and the Marsi who took up arms and brought to Rome an ultimatum: civitas aut libertas, citizenship or freedom. Much like in any other occasion before, the Senate panicked. And in the panic, it resorted to the tried and true method of violence. Not only armies were sent to fight the rebels head-on, but also purges were started to weed out all those who had supported the ridiculous concept of Italian citizenship. When violence didn't prove to be the solution, the Senate tried bribery, freely offering up the coveted citizenship to all the tribes who hadn't joined in the rebellion. The war dragged on for 3 years, destabilizing the economy and crippling productivity. The male population took another hit, with more or less 100,000 dead in the conflict. In the end, Rome managed to prevail, but in a sense, it was a Pyrrhic victory. Yes, they had won the war, but they had given away the very thing they'd been fighting to keep. At the end of the social war, the number of Roman citizens had increased threefold. The war had proven nothing, if not that the situation was spiraling into social and political chaos. Chaos breeds chaos, much like violence breeds violence. If the Romans had expected things to go quiet again after the social war, they were sorely mistaken. On the contrary, they were about to go from the pan to the fire itself. The Gracchi brothers had highlighted a problem that had been brewing in the background for decades, and their deaths started a chain reaction that would end up destroying the Roman Republic forever. Rome went from the social war to the civil war of Marius and Sulla. To be fair, Marius played just a small role in this civil war, as he was already dead by the time Sulla decided to sit as a dictator to control the Republic. But since Sulla's enemies were part of the same party Marius had been, they took up his name in the banner. Gaius Marius was a Roman general and a statesman. As the victor of the Jugurthine and Cimbrian wars, he had proven his military might, and the unprecedented honor of being elected consul 7 times, which he paid in bribes and hush money, had granted him almost a godlike status in the political arena. His political agenda was in line with that of the Gracchi brothers, making him the foremost representative of the populares, a more populist and pro-plebeian group of Roman patricians. Don't get me wrong, he wasn't a plebeian, far from it. He just sympathized with them. His greatest enemy was Lucius Cornelius Sulla, another distinguished politician, even though he managed to obtain the consulship only 2 times, and great military leader, despite the fact that Marius, at the time his superior on the field, had stolen from him the crown of victor for the Jugurthine War. If Marius was a popularis, then Sulla was an optimatus, a representative of the traditional and traditionalist senatorial majority. If Marius's theft of Sulla's glory had been the start of their animosity, their opposite political views and agendas only embittered the rivalry. When Marius, though old as he was, outmaneuvered Sulla yet again, costing him another chance at glory, Sulla retaliated in style. He marshalled his forces and marched them on to Rome. Maybe for us now, such an action doesn't seem that controversial. After all, Julius Caesar did it with more panache and left us also a famous quote for it. This, though, was before Caesar, and the last one to cross the Pomerium in arms had been Remus, and we all know how that story went. Sulla marched on Rome, sweeping away Marius' supporters and forcing Marius himself to flee to Africa. Then, in a bid to regain the chance at glory he had lost, Sulla left the city once again to go and subjugate King Mithridates VI of Pontus. No sooner he had left the city than the popularis faction struck back, plunging Rome into blood and chaos. Seeing this as his chance to get back what he'd lost, Marius came out of hiding for his 7th and last consulate. If before Marius had enjoyed quite a good popularity in Rome, what he did next gave him the reputation of a tyrant. To ensure that no one could question his rule, Marius enacted purges, ruthlessly murdering all his opponents. Only death stopped the bloodbath, old age as it was, since Sulla was still far enough from Rome to be spared the suspicion of being Marius' killer. Still, the populares didn't relent, continuing the purges started by their leader. Claiming to have only the interest of the Republic at heart, Sulla raised 40,000 troops and marched on Rome once again. Defeating Marius' son and his followers didn't take much time, and then Sulla installed himself as dictator, starting proscription lists and enacting purges that were even bloodier than what Marius had done. If we can estimate Marius' body count in the 100, Sulla's is in the thousands. For all that Sulla had basically spat on every single Roman tradition, he eventually stepped down and went into voluntary retirement 10 years later. It was too late, though. His actions had blown open the cracks already existing in the system. Rome's republic would never recover. Much like during the Second Punic War, when Hannibal culling had opened the door for Scipio Africanus' military and political rise, Sulla himself contributed to planting the seeds that would destroy the Roman Republic forever. At this point, we need to take a teeny tiny step back. The Gaius Marius I briefly introduced here spent much of his life as a revered politician. He did not start as one. If anything, he only launched his political career thanks to his marriage to Julia, daughter of Gaius Julius Caesar. I know that everyone seems to have the same name and it's confusing. I totally agree with you. In this case, though, we are talking about the aunt and the grandfather of the more famous Julius Caesar. Marius was then Julius Caesar's uncle, and this marriage affiliation put the Caesars family squarely into the popularis camp. When Marius died and Sulla came back to Rome to become dictator, Caesar's family was one of the first in the proscriptions lists. Had Sulla managed to find a young fugitive by the name of Gaius Julius Caesar, history might have looked very different. Maybe the Republic would have crumbled eventually. Maybe some other hero would have saved it, earning the title of Pater Patriae. We will never know. What we do know is that the spark ignited by the clubbing to death of Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus, and which had laid dormant for 2 generations, was suddenly fanned to life, and the resulting fire would burn Rome to the ground. And here we are, at the beginning of the end. Only one step, one hero separates us from the finishing line of this deep dive. But was Julius Caesar a hero? Or was he a villain? He certainly was considered both during and after his lifetime. We will travel on his path, starting from next episode, and then you can judge for yourself whether or not there was anything heroic in what he'd done. He certainly made history, that's for sure. I thank you for having travelled through these challenging times with me, and I look forward to yet another path before we say goodbye. In the meantime, I invite you once again to join me on my Instagram channel, The Apple and the Hero. And when you do, please say hi. I'm very happy to make your acquaintance and keep you in the loop for the new big ideas that will be coming in the future. As always, all the research and the writing for this episode has been done by me, Sara Orfali, Doctor in History. Goodbye for now. Safe travels.